Well, hello everyone. This is Christiane Squires with Bookwifery.com, and I am so excited to be kicking off this new series, this kind of occasional series, video series of interviews with folks that either I've worked with or think could be helpful to allow you to meet as you are exploring your options in writing and publishing your book. I'm imagining this series to include folks who have been on the author side of things like you and are kind of weighing their options and navigating how to get their book actually out of them. And then also potentially interviewing people that are like designers or agents who can give perspective to the book journey and help you continue to navigate and make decisions and discern your way forward. So for this very first introductory interview, I have the lovely Christine Mason Miller joining me today. Hi, Christine. Thanks for being here.
Hello, Christiane. Thank you. Can you tell I'm excited? I feel like this giant smile on my face.
I am too. I have like this little buzzing inside of me that's like humming at a certain pitch. So Christine and I worked together on her gorgeous memoir, Moving Water. I'm going to show you a copy of it. This is one of the very few copies in the world that exists, and I'm going to let her tell the story of how this book came to be and where it is in the process for her. But Christine and I worked together over the course of maybe a year and a half on your book. Is that about right? Or about a year?
Yes, I think. Yep.
And I will say that number one, she was a dream client to work with. And number two, Christine and our work together was a huge influence in me deciding to kind of step out of freelance book editing, which I've been doing for the last 15 years, and launch my own company, Bookwifery Inc., to work with authors in the way that Christine and I work together and that I have had the chance to work with several other folks with in a particular process that is much more hands-on and, I don't know, kind of it's like midwifing. It's midwifing and it's spiritual direction, and I absolutely love having discovered that. And Christine, you were such a huge part of me discovering that was the next step for me in my journey. So I'm incredibly grateful to you for that.
Likewise. I'm so glad you're doing this.
Thank you. So, okay, so we're going to talk today mostly about your experience of writing Moving Water. And we'll talk a little bit about our experience of working together just to give folks a sense of what that could be like for them if they decided they wanted to go that route, like with me or someone else who serves as a book consultant or coach. But let's talk a little bit about, first, how you would describe what Moving Water, the memoir, is, and then how the idea for this book came to you.
I describe the book as a memoir about the spiritual journey I've taken with my family. And it came about because anytime I looked at like the family I'm in now, I'm in this blended family with my husband and his two grown kids, and there's all these other family members and my own family, my parents and my sister. And if I look at all like the baggage each of us brought to the table, so to speak, a lot of this should have just crashed and burned, particularly between my husband and I and with his kids and the blended family that we've created. And I got caught on this idea that this was just a story that had to be told because somehow it worked, and this is the miracle. But it wasn't just by chance, like it just happened to work out. This worked out for a lot of reasons, for a lot of efforts on my part, on the part of the members of my family, and it was this journey. This journey is the greatest journey of my life. And I've done a lot of incredible, inspiring, creative things that I'm really proud of and I love to share. But this journey in particular, this is my soul's journey. And it was this experience of ending up in a family that on paper, it looks like it should never have worked, yet it's exactly precisely where I needed to be to heal a lot of old wounds and transform them and come through them with an entirely different perspective of so many stories that I'd been carrying around for so many years.
Yeah.
You know, I just had to tell that story.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you did, because it is, I have to just tell everybody who's watching, it is one of the most beautiful memoirs I've read. When I was working on the book, I told you as we were working on it, I could already envision it sitting on my shelf with the other memoirs, which is one of my favorite genre, with the other memoirs that I absolutely cherish. And I just knew your book belonged up there because it was that level of beauty. It's profound. The spiritual lessons that you were learning and working out in your life as you tell the story are so helpful to so many, and for me, even as I was working on the book with you. So where were you in the process of kind of the healing and the awareness and the work of what was going on in your family when you realized that it was something that you might want to write a book about? I mean, were you like on the other end of it, or were you still in the middle of it and you were like, there's got to be a book in here? Like, I know you carried the idea for the book for a long time.
Yes, I was actually still really at the beginning of it. I was just beginning to step into this family because for a long while I resisted it and just kind of put up this barrier that, oh, I don't belong here, and yes, I'm married to my husband, but it's not my family, and I was just beginning to work my way through that belief and dismantle that belief, and then the idea came to me like, I think I need to write a book about this. And that thought stayed with me for another 5 years or so before I finally wrote it. So by the time I actually sat down to write it, I'm not going to say I was through it all because I'm still in it. I'm still in it every day. But I was through it enough to have some perspective and to be able to write about them with a little bit of distance, not distance like emotional distance, but time passes, and so you're able to see things from, I think, more different angles. Not so much maybe when you're right in the middle of it.
You can kind of see how it played it out.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. I remember you and I, the first time we met in person, I think it was 2011, and so, which was 5 years, almost 6 years now, ago, and we had lunch in Santa Monica. It was our first time ever meeting, finally, and I was driving you back to your house, and you said that you thought you needed to write a book about your family, and I was so intrigued by that because I didn't know what that meant. We were still new friends, and I was like, what is that? So I had been carrying for years now this sense of she needs to write a book about her family. I want to know what that means. And now, would you tell a little bit of the story of the time that passed between knowing you needed to write it and finally getting yourself to write it? What was some of that delay about, do you think? Because it was several years before you finally said, I'm doing this and I'm going to get myself in gear.
Right. It was just normal delay, normal resistance. Just for whatever reason, I just wasn't willing or able or ready to sit down and make the commitment. There wasn't anything really stopping me. I just kept... It just kept becoming this thing that I talked about. Oh, I have to write a book. I have to write a book. I have to write a book. But then I wasn't writing the book. And so finally, I reached a point where I said, okay, either write it or stop talking about it. So that's when I said, okay, I'm going to write it.
Yeah, and you took kind of a curious route to getting yourself to write it. You decided that the thing that you needed to motivate you was accountability. And so what did you do?
I created an entire online course.
I love this story.
I went to a bit of an extreme. But it was the online course. I felt like I had a lot of information and insights and knowledge and wisdom that I could share for people who wanted to write and create a book, because I had written a few books before this one. And I knew it would give me the added benefit of holding me accountable to writing this book. Because if I created an entire online course about how to write a book and then I did not write my own book, then that would just make me a big loser.
Aw. It would just tell you that there was something really going on under there that was keeping you from moving forward, and that might need a little bit of attention.
Right.
But it didn't. I mean, you were ready. You put things in place when it came time for you to actually move forward. And that's something I'm curious about your perspective on this, because I think, a book is such a big thing, and especially when it's a memoir, it's coming from such a deep place inside of us. It's so much of life, and it does ask so much perspective from us. And, are we ready to write about it at a certain point, or do we need to wait until we're through it a little bit more? And there's just so much there. that it can, I think a lot of us can carry around the idea for a long time and it never feel like quite the right time. And I guess I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. Like, do you have any regrets about not starting sooner? Do you feel like it happened when it was supposed to happen? Like, what's your perspective on that for your experience with Moving Water?
I would say it happened at exactly the right time. And the day that you make the decision to pursue whatever it is you're wanting to pursue, that's the perfect day. You know, I don't look back and think, oh, I should have started it then or then or then. No, I started it when I started it, and that made it perfect. So there wouldn't have been a better time before or after. It just would have been different. It would have been a different book. It would be a different book if I started it today. Yep. So for the book that you are holding in your hands now, I started it at the perfect time.
I love
just
that.
Because that's when I started it.
Yeah, I love that. I love the freedom that gives us to, you know, anybody who's watching and worrying, you know, I've been carrying this idea for so long. Is it too late? Or, you know, I guess I kind of feel like you're ready when you're ready. And that's a little bit different than what you're saying. Because I do think that there can be times where we do wait a little bit longer. Have you read Big Magic by Liz Gilbert?
Yes.
And how she talks about ideas coming to us and then they can leave if we don't tend to them.
Right.
So I think maybe it depends on what we're doing with the idea while we're carrying it around. You know, are we continuing to nurse it, or are we kind of just setting it aside and then it maybe will leave because we haven't given it any attention and not even any mindfulness? So.
Right. And I had done a little bit of writing here and there during this time when I kept talking about it, but not actually writing it. So I was giving it just enough attention, I think. But now that you say that, I think somewhere deep in my awareness, I knew I was on the verge of losing it.
Really?
I just knew that this, not only do I need to stop talking about it if I don't write it, but if I don't write it, it's going to go away. Like there's something, not the stories per se, but something that little spark was going to go away.
The ability to incarnate it with maybe that spirit that was needed to tell it that way or something.
Yes, you just said it perfectly.
Yeah. So, well, thanks for sharing about that part of the experience. It's so interesting to me to hear about how a book actually comes to get to the point of being ready to write. And so I think because so many of us are carrying around that, you know, am I going to ever write this book? And I know I'm carrying that around for a particular idea I've had for many years. So I'm kind of curious about that for myself. But okay, so you decided it was time to write it or stop talking about it. You decided writing it was the choice you were making. You put together a class. You taught the class. It was amazing. I took the class. And then you started writing your book. What did that look like in a daily way for you to actually be writing the book? Was there a particular schedule you kept for yourself? Was it as inspiration hit? Were there practices that you needed to put into your life that kept you going? What was that?
Our life under this roof is pretty hectic. My husband is retired. We have a chocolate lab. We have a lot of friends and family and house guests and entertaining and all kinds of fun things like that. So it would not have been realistic if I had said, okay, I'm going to write from these hours to these hours every day, and I'm going to sequester myself in my studio, and that's how it's going to happen. I had to essentially put myself right in the middle of everything in order to make it as unprecious as possible. I'm not even sure if that's a real word, but it couldn't be about having all these requirements. I have to have this, and this, or I can't write. No, if I have an hour, then I'm going to write, and I'm going to write at my dining room table so that I'm writing exactly where I already am. I don't even have to go upstairs necessarily. I can, but I don't have to. So I just wrote on our dining room table. That's where I spent most of my time writing the book, with my husband interrupting me all the time, and Tilda coming in and out and wanting to play, and the phone ringing, all those distractions, which some writers, they would never be able to do that. You know, I think everyone has their own system, and mine happened to be just put me in the middle of everything. And if I really needed to shut everyone out, I would just put on headphones with little ambient noise and tell my husband I'm not here in the room. And then he would he would not interrupt me most of the time.
He would do his best.
Right, right.
So you
and if
weren't
I
even
really,
using...
really needed to focus, then maybe I would go to our bedroom or come upstairs to my studio and say, okay, I'm not reachable for the next 3 hours and I'm not going to answer the phone and I'm not going to do that. So I definitely had those moments, but as far as how I wrote the book, it just happened where it happened. If I had 10 minutes, I'd write for 10 minutes. There were some times when I couldn't write for 2 weeks because there was just too much going on. So
I love that.
It happened.
I love that, unprecious, you didn't want to like coddle it, because maybe then it would never get written because the circumstances just weren't perfect enough, or worthy of the book enough. And so it's interesting to think about, kind of dialing that back and pulling down some of those, expectations we might naturally want to place on this big thing that we're doing. And I love the way that was connected for you to just the reality of your life, like this is how our life is, and I need to make my work on this fit within the reality, not try to rearrange my whole family system or the way that our life works. So it's just, I like the encouragement there to like look at what's actually going on and let that be part of your process and your discernment of, what does it look like for me to write a book given the constraints or the realities of what goes on in my world. Right. Yeah. So, so if you had a 10-minute block of time and you're like, okay, I'm going to work on the book for 10 minutes, I come back to that word expectations. What kind of expectations did you have of those 10 minutes? Was it like, let me write a certain number of words. Let me try to work on a scene. How do you even decide what that's going to include?
Well, there would always be something that I was working on. So I would say, okay, I'm going to hammer out this story really quickly, or I had this thought the other day and I want to get it on paper, or I'm trying to work on this one bit of dialogue and I haven't quite gotten it yet. So there was always something at my disposal to work on. I can't think of it. There were definitely times when I sat down and of course just nothing came and I had to stay in my seat and just, eventually get to something. But usually, especially in those smaller spurts, I would take advantage of those 10 minutes because I had something that I wanted to work on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you kind of you're carrying around with you in your regular life an awareness of what's going on in your book world and ideas and things that you can pursue. So you just pick one and just go with it kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay, so you mentioned that you'd published other books before. Christine, I'm talking now to the people that are watching. Christine's a mixed media artist and has published a number of books that are inspirational and mixed media focused and on the creative process and how to bring creativity into our ordinary lives and make them extraordinary that way. So what is it, 3 or 4 books that you've published in that vein? Hello? Hello? Are you there?
Yes.
There you go. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on, but we caught each other again. I'm curious about your previous publishing history and kind of how that informed the way you chose to move forward with this book.
Well, so the other books were completely different from the memoir. They were very visual. One of the books had 19 other contributors. Like you said, they were all about celebrating the extraordinary and the ordinary and bringing creativity into your life. And this was an entirely different endeavor. This was like nothing I had ever done before. So I felt completely out of my league, out of my comfort zone. And I'd done writing before. I've written a lot of essays. I've written a lot of magazine articles. I've written a lot of 800 to 2,000 word pieces. So I've got those down. Mm-hmm. So when I sat down, that was the reality that hit me. Literally, I remember the first day I sat down to start working on the book, and I realized, oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm doing. How do you write a book? How do I write a book? do I even have enough to write a book? So this book was completely different from anything I'd ever done.
How did you find your way forward with that?
Just starting to brainstorm ideas and write stories, and here was a turning point. I think this is a good anecdote, especially going back to what we said earlier about I worked on the book just a little bit here and there for about 5 years. There was one piece of writing I did during that time that I became kind of obsessed with, and it was a pretty long piece, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 words. And I worked on it for a week solid, and I was really proud of it, and I sent it off to some places, got rejected everywhere, and then just kind of put it aside. And I'd sort of forgotten about it. And when I started working on the book and I was starting to write stories and brainstorm, I just felt like I wasn't getting into a rhythm. I'd been working on it for a few weeks, and I remembered that piece. I went back to it and I read it, and I was like, that's it. That is the voice. It was this affirmation that I could do what I wanted to do, that I could write the way I wanted to write and write the kind of book I wanted to write. So these little things that we do along the way, even if they seem little and even if they happen over these long periods of time, they can really help once you finally do decide to go for it. Reading that piece of writing, I turned a corner after that. Like, that's when I was like, I can do this.
Yeah.
It was a huge turning point very early on in the process of the book.
I love how that piece was just waiting for you for that moment. It didn't want to go out and be a magazine article. It wanted to be the piece that helped you know that you know how to write this voice and you know how to write this way, and it was going to give you the jolt you needed to get going. So that's a beautiful story. I love that story. So, okay, what was it, or where were you in the process when you decided that you wanted to bring me into the process with you? How far into writing your book? Do you remember how far you were?
I think I was pretty close to finishing my first draft.
Okay.
Maybe not pretty close, but maybe I think I was at a point where I knew if I did not set a deadline for myself, and if I did not have, here I go again, needing serious accountability, I could see that I'd be able to reach a completion of the first draft. I could also see that it could go on forever and ever. And I think that's when I reached out to you. Okay. And I had this inkling in my mind for a long time by then of, I think Christiane is the person I need with me along this journey. And that's when I reached out to you. And I believe you and I decided, okay, this is the date that I'm going to have the first draft to you. And it was maybe 2 or 3 months, from the time I contacted you. Am I remembering that right?
That is helping jog my memory, because I think it was in the fall, that at some point in the fall that you contacted me and you were saying, beginning of the year, you thought you could have it to me or something like that.
Right.
So I wasn't with you in the writing of a lot of the first draft, but once you had committed to a deadline to get the first draft done, then I was waiting until you hit that point, and then we started working, and we worked through multiple drafts.
Right.
What was that process like for you to go through multiple drafts? I know you said working on your other books was very different because they were different types of books. Did you have a lot of revision process with the other books you had done, or was that kind of a new thing for you to experience with this book?
Also an entirely new experience. The first book I did was an illustrated gift book, so that was mainly artwork. The second book, artwork, illustrations, I was doing it all on my own. There was some writing in it, but it was more art journal style, so the idea wasn't to have these perfectly polished pieces of writing. And then Desire to Inspire, I was working with another publisher, and they had a timeline. This is how it's going to work. This is when we're going to review it. Then you'll review it. But we weren't going through multiple rounds, and we weren't. It just didn't need to be as precise as I knew I would want the memoir to be. So to have you with me along this journey and through all of these drafts was just this amazing gift. I still can't believe that I was able to have this experience with you and that I was able to go through this experience with someone by my side the whole time, guiding me and cheering me on and giving me honest, constructive, supportive feedback, helping me figure out how all of these stories are going to be stitched together. Mm-hmm. It was such a huge, huge gift that I will forever be so grateful for.
Me too. I'm curious for you now to look back. Obviously, you know what the book is finished now. And it went through multiple rounds to get there. So thinking back to kind of where it started for you, the first draft being done and kind of your ideas of what the book was and then kind of as it evolved and became something more, what's it like for you to look back at the different iterations that the book took? I mean, what are some of the things that you learned through the process? I don't know. Just, do you have anything you can riff on about that experience of the revising process?
Well, the way I look at this process is the first draft is really me taking these big clumps of mud, which are my stories, clumps of clay, just dumping them all on the table, getting it all out. And I did a little, just tiny bit of sculpting before I sent it to you. But essentially what I sent to you was my crappy first draft, right? This was,
it was pretty good first draft.
Thank you.
I mean, it came with like pretty tabs and everything. Because you had an idea. I'm remembering for the first draft, you had an idea that each chapter was going to explore a particular theme.
Right. That's right.
And choices you had made along the way in service of that theme in your life. So choosing joy, choosing forgiveness, choosing peace, choosing happiness. I don't remember what they were all called, but there were like 12 of them. And so you had done quite a bit of, sculpting that clay, I think, at that point. It wasn't just mud for sure.
I forgot about that. I always forget that I set it up that way the first time. Mm-hmm. So then with each draft, we were fine tuning it. We were sculpting it even further and further and further. And what I'll say about that whole process is that it wasn't until after, I think, the second draft. So the second draft came back to me with your comments and the comments of some of the other readers, and I worked in all of those revisions. So I was technically at my third draft, and I thought, oh, I'm about to wrap this up. I've got this. But I'd had this little nagging thought the whole time I was writing the book, where I kept asking myself, is this like a self-help book? Is it personal growth? Is it a memoir? Like, it feels like it's a little bit of all three. And, it was just always a question that had never quite settled into my mind. And for a number of reasons during this like 3 to 4 week period when I was taking it from the second draft to the third draft, just based on the feedback I'd received, it dawned on me, no, this has to be a memoir. I need to go all in. And I had been resisting that genre all along because I had just thought, memoir, I don't have this crazy life. It's nothing super, super dramatic or out of the ordinary. But I'd realized I was resisting that and that I needed to go big or go home. I needed to go for it. So then the book took this huge turn. And I wrote to you and I'm like, this book is going somewhere kind of slightly unexpected and, well, a lot unexpected, slightly different. And I'm going to be sending you something like a lot different than what you just received. So that was this was just this surprise. Like I did not expect that to happen. And that's when it became the book that it is now. That I don't think it was even close to being what it is now up until that point. It really took me making that decision to go for it then it started clicking into place.
Yeah, I felt like it really got so much more flesh after that point, because a lot of the
Right.
stories were in the previous
Mm-hmm.
drafts, but it was like you were telling stories about different people in your family or different events that happened, and then it was like your story. You were more fully
Right.
there, and that's the memoir
Yes.
piece. And what I love about that part of the process for you, because it's such a testament to what was important to you throughout the entire process before that, was the intuition piece. And we talked about this a lot when we were working together, was the importance the important place that intuition held in your book writing process. It was what helped you know whether a story belonged in the book or not, whether you wanted to use someone's real name or not, whether you needed to tone down language or just bring it full force. And I remember how many times it was like there were these pieces that were like, what do we think about this? And it would always come back to like, what is your intuition telling you? And I feel like that part of your story, that huge turn in the story to become a memoir, was like that on steroids. It was like your
Right.
intuition is really showing up and saying like, you need to settle this question back here, and this is what it's telling you to do, and you didn't want to do it, and yet you chose to surrender to that. And that was huge trust in your intuition.
Right.
Really,
and it prolonged the whole.
It did.
It meant I wasn't about to wrap it up.
Yes.
It meant I had a lot more work to do. But then I just thought, well, I'm going for it. Like why stop now?
Yeah, and it really did make the book. It just bumped it into a completely different category, I think.
Right.
So.
And it's interesting. One of the reasons that this revelation came to me was because my stepson read the second draft. He was the only family member who was allowed to read any early version of the book. And he said, after he read it, he told me, he said, I hope you know that you, oh no. He said two things, and I'll share this just because it's a beautiful moment. He said, I hope you know that you should never doubt that you're part of this family. And then the other comment that he made that helped get me to this revelation, he said, I really loved the parts of the book where you said, I am X, I am here, I'm in this place, I am, because I think there was, in the second draft, I might have even started each chapter with an I am statement.
I remember that.
And him saying that, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. What if I did that throughout the entire book? What if the book was, this is where I am, and I want to pull the reader into my body and experience what I'm experiencing, which I had done here and there in the earlier drafts. But once I turned that corner, that was the number one goal in every part of the book.
Yeah.
So it was really a shift in voice and in making it first person.
And like, what are you really trying to do? And it was that, let the reader incarnate the experience with me.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is where your support, one of the many ways that your support was pivotal, because then you helped keep all of this in order. And, because I would start a chapter here, and then we would move over here, and then over here, we'd have to get back here, and then I'd have to wrap it back up here somehow. And you helped keep all of that moving consistently and flowing consistently, and not letting readers get confused.
Yeah, because there was also a lot of time shifting that was happening.
Right.
Sometimes we were in the present, sometimes we were back in your childhood. Sometimes we were 5 years ago and in the present. It's so that definitely is something that you have to kind of think about. How does time work in a book, like with tenses and making sure the reader is following you from one place to another, and yeah. So let's see. I had a question that I was going to ask and I lost it. So let me just see what I have on my list here. What were you thinking about publishing as you were going through the process? What was your goal as you were writing with that?
To not think about it, to not think about publishing, because that just I couldn't even go there. My number one goal with this book was to write the best book I could write. That was number one. Anything beyond that was going to be what it was going to be. So I didn't think about it. I'd ponder here and there, but I never said to myself, I'm writing it for this publisher or I'm writing it because I need to write it.
Yeah. When did you start thinking about publishing Questions?
As we were finishing the last draft. I think as I sent, once I made the big change, we'll call it the big change, and you expressed some concerns about it can be hard, for people to keep track. There was some kind of question about that. So I sent out some copies to some friends, tell me what you think about this one particular issue. And that was when I started thinking, okay, if this is really close to being finished, what do I want to do? And that's when I started thinking, I think I'm just going to have a small number of copies published and I'm just going to give them away. And that's where I'm going to start. And that's as far as I'm going to go. I'm not going to worry about what might happen beyond that.
What was your motivation for choosing to just start with a small number of copies?
It just felt like the right thing to do. This is a book with stories about my family, about my close friends. It's about my life. So it just felt like the right thing to do. Small number of, create the book I want to create. It's a beautiful book. My friend Liz Calick designed the cover, and it just felt like the right thing to do.
Given the subject matter and the people that were in part of the story, make some copies that you can give to those folks and let them read it. And
right.
I know a part of it too was also wanting to see how people responded to it, and letting that inform your continued discernment about what the book might want to do next.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes. Yes, that's right. That's right.
So what has that been like for you? I'm trying to get us kind of up to where we are now. Like what's been your path? And, so you published, what was 125 copies. You did a reading of close friends and family. And you started getting feedback. And what kind of feedback were you getting? And how did that kind of spur your thinking to the next step?
The most consistent feedback that I'm receiving from everyone is that they can't put it down. And so I think it's true because everyone's saying it. And it's been amazing. I feel like I've been in this little bubble with this book. I got these copies produced. I was able to fulfill one huge dream, which was to be able to give you a copy of the book in person. I was able to read it for the first time at the Conscious Booksmith retreat. I've slowly sent these books out. They've gone all over the world. I took all summer long to get them shipped because I wrapped them a certain way, signing all of them, all that. The reading at my home, there were like 25 people here. I mean, that was one of the most beautiful experiences of my entire life. And so now I'm starting to get ready to offer it to the public on my own. And I'm going to get more copies published with the ISBN number and all that. So now I'm going to do it officially, so to speak, and gearing up for that. But it's been great. I mean, I'm so happy I did it this way because I just got to be in this process for this first round. I didn't have to worry about marketing, promoting. I just got to keep it to myself for a while. I just got to keep it in this universe for a little bit.
In this little bubble, yeah. Savor it. I really feel like that as you were talking, you were savoring every step of that. I mean, even just the way you wrapped the books and sent them out. And excuse me. So you've decided to...
And being able to receive... Yeah, just being able to hear what my family has to say about it. Just giving them the time to read the book without worrying who else is reading it.
Yeah.
They knew there's a very small number of other people reading this book, and they're people I know.
Yeah.
So giving my family that cushion as well, giving my friends that cushion. All of us got to be here together.
I love that. So you have decided, you just told me before we started our call, that you've decided to go, the next step is you're going to print copies and self-publish a broader number on your own rather than going the traditional publishing route, which was something you were really holding as a question for the last several months. So can you share a little bit about your decision to go self-publish rather than pursue an agent and try to get it out there with a traditional publisher?
There are a lot of different reasons. I would say one of the main reasons is that I already feel like there is this momentum with the book. There is this energy behind it right now, and I want to tap into that. And which doesn't mean I have these big hopes of, I hope it becomes a New York Times bestseller list. Like, that's going to happen or it's not going to happen. That's out of my hands. Right now, there's energy building behind this book, and I haven't really done much of anything to try to create that, aside from sharing it with the people I'm closest to and sharing it with people who I feel compelled to share it with. So it's just wanting to tap into that and just wanting to continue to do this on my own terms and in my own way. And if down the road I end up partnering with another publisher or agent to give it a different life, a different journey, whatever you want to call it, then okay. But for now, this is what feels right.
Yeah, and what you said about the energy around it, because as we were talking earlier, it's like, if you try to go with a traditional publisher, you've got to find the right agent, and then they've got to shop it around, and then they've got to go through the contract process, and then they've got to go through the internal process of the editing and the cover design and all of that stuff that would, by the end of that, it's 2 years probably out before your book is out there, and you already have it, this gorgeous book that has energy around it and momentum, and to push pause for 2 years to get through that, it does seem a little bit kind of backward to go that route. Given all the particularities that are going on with the book right now, that you already have a copy, that people are reading it, they're telling you they can't put it down. You're doing interviews. You said this is your 5th interview already about this book, and you haven't even tried. Yeah, so it's just neat how. I think what I love about your story overall, like what I just feel like is resounding from everything we've talked about today, is there's been such an attention paid to discerning your way forward. Is it time for me to write the book yet? What do I need in order to write the book? What kind of support? Let me bring Christiane into the process. Okay, I'm writing several drafts. What kind of book is it? Oh, I actually think it wants to be a memoir. Let me take time to actually reformulate the whole book. Okay, now it's time to share it with my family, and now it's time to give it a little bit more room. It's like you took it a step at a time, and you really listened to what was needed in that moment. And that's the way I have seen that happen. Does that ring true for how you experienced it?
Absolutely. And I talk a lot about following intuition and how I've learned the hard way, what happens when I ignore it. And so with this book in particular, my intuition has been really strong every step of the way. And so I've known in my bones every time what needs to happen. It's almost like there's this force around me that's it's not going to let me go over here. It's just not. I can maybe explore it, just like maybe I should, just to be safe, what might happen, but no. Like this is where you need to go, and it's fluid. It doesn't feel rigid, but it's this energy around me that has been guiding me every step of the way, and I just trust it. And that's another reason why I decided to publish it on my own, is I trust this book, and it's going to go where it wants to go. So right now the book is telling me this is what it wants. The idea of trying to pursue some other entity or gatekeeper to get it out in the world, that feels like it would be trying to force something. Doing it on my own feels very natural, feels very easy, feels very right.
It sounds like it's giving you the same feeling you had all along when you knew what the next right step was. So
yes.
It's neat when you can identify what that feels like, because it can become a touchstone. Okay, when it doesn't feel right, it feels like forcing. And so if I'm pursuing something that feels like forcing, then I need to pay attention to that, because it probably means I'm supposed to be going a different direction with this. So, well, thank you so much for all that you shared about your process and your decisions and, what you allowed to happen and flow through you and what you also gave of yourself to do it. Is there any last anecdotes or stories or advice that you would want to offer anybody that's listening that you didn't get to share yet today?
Any other advice? Just if you really want to write a book, then write. And if you have time to write, then get in your chair and write. And if nothing's coming, then write the sentence, nothing is coming. And it's all about that. There's I have a course. There's all kinds of books about writing. There's all kinds of advice and websites supporting writers. Mm-hmm. Really what it comes down to is sitting in your chair and writing.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of your course, I did want to say a little bit at the end here about where people can find you, what kinds of things you're up to right now. So the book is Moving Water. Show the cover again. You're in the process of creating broader distribution for it. So do you have why don't you tell us, what do you have going on that is in support of your book right now and where you're going?
I am in the process of revising my website right now, and there are going to be a lot of resources for writers and aspiring authors on the website. And while it's being built, I just have a splash page up. So that will be coming probably mid-November. And then at the beginning of December.
That's at ChristineMasonMiller.com.
.com. Yep. And pre-orders for the book will begin in December, and then the books will start shipping in January.
Fabulous. That's awesome. And then you also have the Conscious Booksmith course. Is that still going to be going on? People can access that course into the new year?
Yes. You can register for that course at any time. And while my website is down, there'll be a link to the course on my website when I open it up again. But in the meantime, you can go to animist.com, ANIMYST.com. They're the ones who actually run the course.
Yep. And I'll put links to all of this information in the post for the video. But
Thank you.
Conscious Booksmith is Christine's course that helps you kind of access all the info and inspiration and motivation to write your book and figuring out your way forward. Moving Water is the book. ChristineMasonMiller.com is the website. And this is Christine. And I'm so grateful to have had you here today, and so grateful for the chance to have worked with you on your book.
Such a gift. Thank you for everything.
Thanks, Christine. Bye, everyone.